recently had a licensed electrician give us a brief summary on the quality and condition of the electrical services in the church. And I'm going to read off just a few of the key things that this person had given back to us. The electrical panel is a 100 amp service. It's located in the basement stairwell and is not up to current code regarding working space around the panel, as well as showing signs of age. Grounding of this electrical system is also not up to current standards and due to age may fail if there is a large fault to occur in the electrical system. He goes on to say, due to the age and historical significance of this structure, I would recommend a detailed inspection of the basic wiring of this structure and at the least consider an electrical service upgrade and thorough inspection of all the wiring in the building, and at the least a removal of any of the VX cables showing rust or other deterioration. I would also strongly suggest a service upgrade and relocation of the panel to a code compliant location in the building. So we all know that, yeah, we've got some old wires in that building, and for the few people that have actually gone down into the basement and crawled on your hands and knees as you're underneath the floor, you see a lot of this cable, and it's in a steel enclosure, but you can see it's rusting. It's been there probably for, well, we don't know how long. You know, none of us here. Maybe Henry Jones would have known, a few others, but you know, unfortunately they're not here with us, and they can't give us that information. So over the last several years, starting with the construction of the kitchen, you know, we started thinking about, well, you know, we're paying for an extra line over at the church. Maybe we, you know we need to upgrade the service at the church. Why don't we run a line from here over to there? And we started looking at things. We kind of dragged our feet because it's going to cost a lot of money to get some things done. Anyway, long and short of it, we started looking into it further and further and further, and said, no, having the line come across isn't that much of a cost to us compared to what it might cost to go over there. And quite frankly, it just didn't really seem to make a lot of difference. So we started looking at, okay, what's involved with just putting in, you know, upgrading the panel that's in there from a 100 amp to a 200 amp service. Any new residential home is going to have at least a 200 amp service nowadays. So, you know, we don't have a big, huge electrical demand over there, but just the same, you know, it would be nice to do that. Then we were thinking, yeah, geez, it'd be really nice if we could do maybe some of the rewiring. And as we're kind of going through all of this, lo and behold, we've gotten some donations towards that end, so it's making it a lot more realistic. So Buildings and Grounds has talked to at least 2 different contractors about replacing the panel, and to one of them about possibly, you know, what might be involved with rewiring the church. And we are in the process of developing a request for a cost proposal to actually replace the panel. And what we would do is put a new sub panel back over in the bell tower area, because that's where most of the electric is being used. We have some up front as you come in, up in the balcony and for the organ, but the other half of it is all over by the altar. So we're thinking about possibly putting in a sub panel back over there to make it easier to deal with in the future. We've also gone ahead, and you can't really see much on here, but we've got some floor plans of the church, and right now we've got all of the existing electrical shown on here. We're not showing the wires, but you know, you can't really see these details, but there's a whole series of little dots. I invite you to come up afterwards if you haven't seen it already, and take a look at what we have down here. Now, that's going to be part of what goes to part of this cost proposal. They'll have to look at what's there, and that'll help them decide, you know, what it's going to cost them. They also are going to have to come and visit the church because they need to go down into the basement. They also need to see the access to the wiring for the chandeliers that are hanging from the ceiling. And that's not really something that everybody wants to have to do. But so the other thing we're going to be looking at, we're starting to look at, and we would welcome some input from people like Josh for the for upstairs in the balcony area, and people who work for the altar guild is in terms of what's going on back in the sacristy. We want to know, are there other things that you think you need? Are there other, we're thinking, okay, we know we're going to need some outlets up in the balcony for the recording and so forth for the of the services. I'm not sure if Josh needs more electrical outlets or if he needs other additional power up there. These are all the things that we're going to take into account. And we're going to then add these on to these drawings so that what we can do is go out and solicit, get some costs from contractors. We're going to need some good sized contractors because when you start looking at all of this stuff, it's a big church and there's wire all over the place. It's not so easy to determine how we're going to get some of the outlets and some of the other things done, because it's not like a new house where you can just put it in and then they're going to put the sheetrock over it. So we have to, the contractor's going to have to deal with a lot of those issues. So we're hoping to have something out, in the next month or so that might be going out. But in the meanwhile, if you have some thoughts on that, please let me know. Sorry about that. Next on the list is lighting. I was sitting in the back of the church, which I don't normally sit that far back, and I noticed that, okay, it's light out, we have the chandelier on, people can see fairly well, but I noticed particularly on the north side of the church, in the corners away from where the chandelier is, that that light was drifting off. And what had happened if it was even more cloudy, or we have early morning services like at 8 o'clock and the sun's just starting to rise come December, it gets to be a problem. So we're thinking about ways, and you might see us over the next year or so do a little bit of experimentation with some ways of adding some lights. We'll probably ultimately want to get a contractor in that could provide some support, somebody that deals with lighting specifically, because there's a number of issues there. Now, a key thing safety-wise is we are looking to the platform that the altar is sitting on right now is on a second smaller platform in the front of the church. It's not just the altar, but it's got the railing and everything else. And I know myself, and most of you have probably seen or participated in taking a little stumble coming down off of that. Some people have actually fallen, not too many times, but it's a hazard. It's a very big hazard. And what we think we would like to do is we're going to look into removing that second set of that second riser, if you will, and have that just all one level as it was originally. And now one of the key things with that is that we will have to take the communion rail down and work with somebody, a real specialist that can deal with this older woodwork and get that so it'll end up being just a straight line going across. But the idea is to keep it intact to the extent we can, but have that go on across. So that would, it'll bring it forward by having this lowered down. The altar itself can come forward. We'll have, Father Rod doesn't have to sit there, and as he kneels down, behind the altar, he doesn't have to put his butt up against the back of the
I'm on a diet right now.
I could say, aren't we all? But anyway, so that is, it'll also ultimately allow better access back to the sacristy. Not everybody goes back there, but for those that you have, you kind of go off to the right, you go towards the back of the church, then you step up, you go through this narrow little passageway, and then you go through the door into the sacristy, and you're stepping down, and by getting rid of that platform, we would be able to kind of just go straight in and make that a lot more of a little bit less of a hazard, and even a bit more of a help with the safety issue if there were a fire. That would be a means of egress. Not that everybody could do that, but it would be, available. Now, getting on to, let's say, accessibility, one of the things that we're also looking into, again, this would require somebody who's really got some exceptional woodcraft type skills. We're looking at taking apart, or maybe even eventually all of the front pews. We don't want to necessarily remove them, but take the front out and modify things as we need to, so that people with wheelchairs or walkers, because we could put a chair in there so that they can sit on it, could be up front and not have to stay way in the back, where they may not be able to hear everything. We do have a halfway decent sound system in there. I say halfway decent, it could be improved and will be someday. That's ultimately other things that will get involved with all of this. But we're looking at doing that, and we need to identify a couple of key people we can talk to see what might be involved with doing that. Something that is not necessarily a huge safety and accessibility issue, but kind of related, is we've looked into a little bit into perhaps doing, because our furnace is at least 15 going on 20 years old, not that it's expected to fall apart any day now, but we are thinking about the future, and we've been in touch with one contractor about what would be involved with putting in a heating and air conditioning system. You see these things nowadays quite a bit, very frequently, where they have a unit outside. There's some tubing, maybe you don't even see tubing, it's enclosed, but it runs up on the outside, goes to something on the wall, and takes care of, it'll do both heating and cooling. So we've been, and it's, yeah, exactly. It'll be much more energy efficient. And as the contractor told me, he goes, it's not necessarily that you're going to have a refrigerator in here. It's still going to be, if we set it to 72, it might get down to 74 or 75, but it's going to be nice dry air as opposed to what's in there now, which is, a little bit of a soup. So and the cost for something like that, you can get close to half of the cost in rebates and so forth. A big one is Eversource right now. He told me about an outfit that spent about, wasn't a church, but it was a public organization, organization, I don't know, it was Lions, that type of a thing. They had a building that they just did. It was on the order of $40,000, and that organization had just gotten a check back for $17,000 from Eversource. That's just one possible source of getting some funds back. You could end up getting, if we, look into other sources, maybe some grants and other things, we could cut the cost, our actual cost, in half probably. So it's something to consider, particularly in light of, okay, hey, our furnace is going to have to be replaced someday. Chuck, you mostly had talked to Nutmeg a few years back about what would be involved with replacing the furnace from oil to gas, which really is not so much, it's basically replacing the furnace, it's just that it would be gas. It was $30,000, so you're going to spend some money somewhere down the line anyway. So that's something that we're kind of looking into in a little bit more detail. The only other thing I really wanted to bring up, and it's under other, is not quite, again, safety and accessibility, maybe a little bit more accessibility, is We are considering, it's kind of longer term, and it's not at the highest level of on the highest part of the list, but we are thinking about maybe trying to add a bathroom in there. An architect has looked at this, it is feasible, it's really, gonna be part of the cost of getting water over there, hooking up to the sanitary sewer line and so forth, so, but it would, I don't know if you want to speak to about.
I can do that.
Okay.
To add to that, I just want to share that it is an accessibility issue. The number one reason people don't come to church is accessibility, physically getting into the church. The number two reason people stop coming to church are because of incontinence issues, that we don't often think of that. I know, and I'm not going, no names will be shared, but I know of one member of this congregation who is a very faithful attendee, comes every week, and the only way this person can come, but does come, is they wear an Attends product during church, because it's the only way they could do it. They could never ever make it over here, but that's true dedication. But that is the number two reason people stop going to church, is because of issues and concerns of incontinence. And Kurt doesn't even know this, but on Friday, we have our equivalent of the Rotary that meets here. And there was a plumber here, so guess what? He showed me where he would hook up the water, how the water line would go over. He's gonna come over and really get in the basement and give us a quote for a bathroom and a water hookup. That's Friday, so that happened on Friday. So things are, at least getting the information, starting by pulling together all the information. But we don't often think of that. We think of sometimes we've got bathrooms in the parish hall, what's the problem? Well, it's a huge problem for a number of people in our congregation. I mean now, not years to come. So it's something to really think about as an important accessibility issue.
Yeah, and as probably one of the younger members of the church at 71, we're not getting any younger. So it's, that little trek just over to the parish hall, is not necessarily the easiest thing to do anymore. So.
In bad weather as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all I have.
So I'm gonna add a couple of things here to this, just so you know where are we kind of now with, in terms of, I just want you to know we're far from a deficit, because like I said, we have $10,000 left over from grants that we didn't actually end up spending. That's already been banked. 3 donors have given a total of $50,000 already. So we have 50,000 plus the 10 is 60,000, and then a variety of other smaller grants. We're almost at $70,000 right now, and we haven't even talked about all of this that's involved. But that's pretty extraordinary when we haven't even really put out an appeal. So just so you know, we are far from in the hole on doing this work, and we're trying to do it by phases, rather than a huge capital campaign. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, I have to get a grant application in tomorrow. Preservation Connecticut says they're interested in giving us another 15 to our renovation project, but it's got to be done tomorrow. So just to let you know that we're far from a deficit. So at this point, we'd like to get your reactions. I was hoping I could press one of our members to walk this around so you can be heard and the people on the recording can hear you.
John, let me volunteer.
Thank you, John, for volunteering.
I will write.
Anyone that would like to talk or, express their opinion, just come up here and I'll hold the mic for you.
Go to them,
There's always a wise guy in the crowd. Well, who has the first brilliant question or idea? There's one right back here.
Hi, I'm sure you thought of this, but I didn't hear it, so I'm just going to bring this up in case you somehow did not think of it. The last church I attended had me do a church security study, and the first thing that came up was you enter through the back of the church, you leave through the back of the church. There was no easily accessible, obviously labeled exit from the front of the church. And in any security situation, whether it's a fire that breaks out, or it's actually a church invasion, which we know has happened, you have to have a way to get out through the front of the church. And it has to be something that people in wheelchairs can get out of. It has to be something that you can see. You can't have this that happen, everybody saying, where is this? It has to be labeled so we all know where it is. And that was the very first thing we came up with security. As it is, if the only way we know to get in and out of the back of the church is one person with a gun, and we're all hostage. One fire and we're all burning.
All right. Any, as you can see, even in this room, the code, since this room was constructed under the code, we have plenty of exit signs. So thank you for bringing up that very valid and important point. Would anyone like to carry the subject further or move on to a different subject?
I'll just say that it's a very good point, and partly, as I mentioned before, about the idea of removing that top platform would allow more access. Right now, it would be accessible to those, who are able to move on their own. I don't think it's wide enough to get a wheelchair through there. And going out the back door, certainly the first thing you do is go down a step. So it would not be necessarily all that accessible. And that is something that we should be concerned about, because the idea of a gunman coming in is, of course, it's becoming, I don't want to say, it's becoming more prevalent. And I think it's not likely, but to take that thought and say, no, it'll never happen, that's when it happens. But the idea of fire is probably a lot more. We have candles burning, we have right now old electric that could cause problems. So I think it's a very good point, and one we're going to have to look at. I'm not sure we have any easy solutions without maybe doing some modifications that might not be what we really want to do, but we're going to have to look at that.
All right, anyone else? That's the point of this conversation today. What you've heard so far are ideas that have come to the table before, and this is another wonderful one to add to our thought.
I concur with the people that are concerned about the security. Many times I stand at the altar and think, what would I do to help people if somebody came in that back there? I don't know what I could do, So we really need two exits that are reasonably large so that people can get out in a hurry if they have to. And if there's a fire, same thing. Thank you.
All right, any other thoughts? Sure.
Indirectly related to that, the sacristy, or we were talking about the water source. I don't know if Kurt remembers when we came in '85, there was a sink in the sacristy, but it didn't work. So at one time there must have been a water source. I don't know if anybody's been here long enough that would ever remember that. So I was just thinking about that. That would be nice if we could have that again.
I don't think there was ever a water source. I think, as you do sometimes now, bring water over there. I think that's all there ever was it was a means of having the water go down below the floor of a church, which is not necessarily a good idea, because you're putting water down there. It's not really getting a chance to dry out all that easily, and that could lead to some damage to the wood underlying things and so forth. So, John, Laurel has it. Oh, Chuck's going to talk about it.
Back in
Closer.
in the late 70s or so, Lynn and a bunch of us did run a water line over to that church. And we had a shut-off valve that was in like a municipal cavity that had a lid on it. Now, it did run into the sink, if I recall. but it caused issues in the wintertime. You could see condensation on the windows all around the sacristy. It was not a good thing. And I was totally against it, and so were a bunch of other folks after a while. So the line was cut off and covered over, well, it was covered over to begin with, but there was a plastic line, it's down there somewhere. And we could, you know, we could do that again, but we have to have a means of draining the water out. And hopefully you can maybe address that with the plumber guy. And that would be something we could think about. And I believe now, today, I think there is a vessel, like a hot water heater that people have been using to wash the vessels. So this practice, and I don't know whether you take the water back to the hall or whether the water comes back. So we don't any longer have drainage into the lower part of the.
Well,
We
that.
do, but it's
Messina
very
drains
little.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. That Messina that Father Ron hooked up, that drains, and the water source has to come over here.
Yeah.
You still have to bring it.
You still have to bring the water over and heat it.
But it drains down in below the floor.
But it's very, very little,
Right.
maybe a gallon.
Half a gallon a week, yeah.
But if there's a bathroom, would you need that?
That's right.
Well, I'll go ahead and speak on behalf of Lynn.
The question was, if we have a bathroom, would we need to have water in the service? Couldn't they just go in?
The bathroom will be a full handicap bathroom. It will have a sink and a jug. And you probably, without too much of a problem, could have, you know, if we had water there, you could easily have that water drain down into some type of a sump that gets pumped up to the front of the church to drain out with what goes out of the bathroom. I mean, it's just a matter of money, that's all. You know, we can do anything. Anyway.
Well, I just wanted to
We
mention.
know which benefit they were recording.
Okay.
We use the mic and
Oh, okay.
the
That way, when the
recording.
recording, when we put this on and everybody's looking at you.
All right.
I just wanted to mention that I can't wait to get rid of the grate that's in the middle of the walkway in the center of the church. So many people, when they come to visit, heels get stuck in there and people trip and, you know, it's just something that we need to get rid of, whether or not we, well, it'll be great to have a new
It'd be
system
great
that
not to
gets
have
rid
a
of it.
grate.
Great, not that great.
Yeah,
Because that's a hazard for people.
it
too.
is.
Yeah.
You're absolutely
I've seen
right.
a lot of people trip.
I think the garden committee might like.
One of the things, well, I want to say about the grate is, when I did talk to this contractor about the heating and ventilation system, now they're one of the Eversource contractors that, you know, you could use, that you would be able to get this larger rebate back from Eversource. And one of the things they have to do with their documentation to Eversource is to say they have disconnected the existing heating system. Now, he said that, you know, a lot of the times they'll disconnect the electric going to something, they'll disconnect the fuel line, indicating that these are all things that in 5 minutes we could put back together again. He also said earlier that in the discussion, you know, as we talked about things, he goes, you know, most people usually keep the existing heating system they have as a backup. Now, we were talking about this at Buildings and Grounds just the other day. You know, if we lose electric, well, you lose the HVAC, but you also still lose the power to be able to use the furnace. So, you know, anybody got some money to put in a big generator so we have it on standby? Anyway, that's enough. You know, that's way down on the list, but that is something to think about, because the system still could, a system still could go down, and you know, if you, instead of spending, I don't know how much money trying to remove all of that stuff, just leave it there. Get it serviced once a year for $125 or $150, and you have that added security of if the HVA system does go down, you know, then, all right, turn on the other thermostat. Let's go, we'll still have service and not have to worry about it. But, which goes back to, well, we're gonna have to rethink about the grate and how we could still remove that and still, because that's where the air comes into the furnace. And, but we could work things.
Yeah, just temporarily, when
Well,
we're not
yeah,
using it.
we could put a carpet over it and remove it if we need to use the furnace. So, anyway, there's always things. Erica.
Hi, I was just wondering with upgrading the furnace, if you're thinking, upgrading the electrical, if you're thinking about putting solar anywhere with that.
We haven't. It's not a bad idea, but I'm not sure if we're ready to have a whole bunch of solar panels on top of the church. You know, well,
That's
Brian's in favor of it.
He wants it here.
Oh, put it on here. Oh, then we have to run the electric from here over to there, which we've tried to avoid doing. But we could still do it, even just for this building alone. So, no, Brian was saying we should put the solar up on this roof.
You don't run off your own solar.
If you're thinking about the bigger picture with, you know, building the new plot of land and everything in the housing development, we could see if there was an area you could put a solar garden to help build, you know, do the church and whatever.
That's a distinct possibility. It's not on our radar right at the moment. We would still need to redo the wiring and everything else.
Yeah.
The source of the electric would be, you know, is always something down the line.
I just have a thought. You don't have to run it.
Laurel has a thought. I'll
You
repeat
can
it.
repeat it, okay?
Laurel's thought
My
is,
thought is that we're gonna need to have stations for electric cars, and it might be a good idea, or we might be able to get some kind of grants for that sometime down the line. And that might be something we could do either across the street or part of whatever we do with the property we're gonna develop, and then the other thing is, if you have a large pavilion, you could also, for the future, you could also have solar and then maybe those charging stations. It might be a thought if you can get the money to,
In the new parking lot.
yeah.
Well, anywhere.
I mean, it might be able, you might be able to tie it into some kind of grants. Father's great at that, so.
we could be the first church in Connecticut with a solar
Yeah,
parking
electrical
lot
outlet for
charging
cars.
station.
Yeah.
Just for the
Well,
record,
maybe.
she was talking about having, worried about charging stations for electric cars. And,
Exactly.
you know, right now, the US government is really, really pushing that stuff. And they're becoming more and more affordable. And we're gonna, you know, 20 years from now, you know, other than my 1988 Mustang, most of us are gonna be driving electric cars, so.
I have one more thing to say. The technology is changing so fast with both the batteries and the cars. You know this as an engineer, I'm sure, that it might be just something to think about. Not really something to jump into yet, because it could be outdated in 5 years at the rate we're going.
Can you repeat
Father
that,
Ron?
John?
Go ahead.
We don't want to be outdated, that's for sure. But before we install, make sure that before we make any investment in this kind of charging station, that we feel comfortable that the bugs have been bugged out of the system, which is like, you know, if I'm standing here just thinking, if we only had somebody that was good at writing grants. I'm being totally facetious, because if it weren't for Father Ron, I'd never, and I have had a little experience in this arena, not had anybody so aggressively proactive on subjects like this than him. So we're very fortunate.
Question,
The church is designated as a historical site, correct?
Yes.
Is there any necessary input from the Historical Society, either locally or statewide, for anything on the outside of the church?
It'd be something to confirm. I'm not sure. There always is when you get into that arena. However, we do have a very close relationship now with, with John Barron, but also professionally with the Preservation Commission, the State Preservation Commission, who became our friends, just to remind everybody, with the stained glass project. That was our first partnership with them, and it's then moved on to the roof, and now possibly an additional one.
And yeah, to answer your question, I don't know specifically, but certainly I think if we think about the HVAC system, in talking with the contractors, never mind, I'm gonna let Father run.
I can answer that a little bit in terms of the historical building stuff. For instance, I had him come in and we talked about all these kind of things, anything related to the upgrading of electric and all of those kind of systems. They're gung-ho, go for it, which is, by the way, what they want to help us fund. So they said, fine with all that. When it comes to structural appearance things, absolutely. So, you know, like if you decide to take out the stained glass windows or something like, or do something like that to the physical building, particularly on the exterior, then you're into, because it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Our local Historic Properties Commission is one of the people who writes letters of support for all the grants I've submitted. So in terms of that, that's that group. But anything related to physical things, and the thing is like the front area of the altar. If we're talking about egress, we're going to have to deal with that a fifth facade. And fortunately, had an architect design something that we're not going to get into today, but just to let you know, more to come. A fifth iteration that actually might answer some of the accessibility issues out to the tower. So that's a possibility. Thank you, Brian, and others for bringing that up, because it fits right into that design that we actually have done already. That is really quite remarkable. So just by fate, but faith.
Erica, just to say, real quick, Gail, when I talked to the HVAC fellow, what he was looking at was, you know, the outdoor portion of the HVAC system would be put on the west end of the church, is where the bell tower is. So they would be kind of on the back side and not that much, you know, they have the tubing, piping work that they have has a little bit of a plastic enclosure, which would be in a reddish brown color, so it kind of matches the brick somewhat. I don't think that would be an issue for them, because we're not changing the structure, we're adding something outside, but we are kind of keeping it out back so it's not right out front. That would certainly not be a good thing.
It'll be masked quite effectively.
Yeah.
Not solar panels, not quite so easy to mask.
Actually,
Just on the preservation aspect, just to remind you that when you walk into toward the church, there's a plaque right on the outside of the building. So if you haven't read it before, you might be interested in taking a peek.
Actually, speaking on the historical and keeping the appearance of the historical, I don't know if everyone's aware that they do make special solar panels for historical buildings that look just like the shingles that exist on the church. So it is something that you can do, and it is a possibility.
Good. And that's the point of this whole conversation today. Len is waving his hand, and we all came to listen.
No, I'd just like to say the electrical expenses for this building are about 8 times the church. So if you're gonna put solar panels on something, this is a place to put solar panels on first.
Agreed. And, you know, if we're gonna, we could take a look at doing solar panels on here. We could take a look at having a solar panel farm, as was mentioned, you know, where it's not on top of the roof, but located, it could be down at the far end of the cemetery, just, you know, yeah, you have to pay more for a line to come up and bring the electric up, but, you know, it's out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, I know you can save quite a bit of money, but Len is absolutely right in that we spend a lot more money here than we do over there.
And that's why this meeting this morning is so good, because we really are creating the agenda for the Journey Committee here. So as you're thinking, and also when you're, you know, among everyone else at maybe a dinner or something, and have some thoughts, please jot them down and send them in this direction.
Yeah.
To let you know that in the process of the Journey Committee work, we've done a lot of brainstorming too. There's a lot of things on punch lists that we've got to set in priority, even given the financial resources that we have and the people resources that we have. So one thing I wanted to add is that we also have a former St. Peter's congregant who's the chief of energy for DEP, and that's Diane Duva, and she is making a list for us of all the potential monies and grant opportunities and loan opportunities. Also, where in the process things like the electric car stations are, solar farms, the historical nature of solar panels that could be put on a church. There is also a pool through Energize CT. We've taken advantage of it in terms of changing our energy supplier, but that's small compared to a pool of money that's been made available some time ago to communities of faith that hasn't been tapped because it hasn't been advertised. But Diane advertised it to me and we're going to pursue it. So, but it also encapsulates the whole issue of energy and rebates and HVAC systems. However, we've got to prioritize our money, as I said, and our people, and kind of think how this is going to work. And that's part of the journey that we've been talking about since 1734. You got to decide where your low-hanging fruit is and tackle that, and make sure it's part of a larger plan that doesn't look like dragging feet. One thing we will be doing for the entire parish is putting out all the things we're talking about in regular communications, and there's lots of ways to do that. Through technology, but not everybody's comfortable with that. Through sermons, through teaching opportunities, what's in the hall, mailings, all kinds of things to let people know where St. Peter's has been, where it is, and where it's going, and why decisions are being made such as they are. Because the worst thing you can have is poor information that leads to concerns that perhaps could be allayed another way. If you need to give input to us, grab us any way that you can and tell us. There's lots of people and lots of ways to do it. Drop a line to the office. It doesn't make any difference how we hear, but we need to be a family that makes good decisions along the journey. Thanks.
All right, other thoughts this morning?
Kathy, you thought you were gonna have it easy. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a sign.
Come on now.
No, John sits down. It's like, no more questions, please.
I got the message, John.
I just want to attest a little bit to the safety issue in that platform. Kurt did a wonderful job of describing getting in and out of the sacristy, staking left and right and up and down. What he didn't mention is we're doing that carrying vessels with consecrated elements in it. That's when you're cleaning up for the altar guild. When you're a server on the altar, Father Ron and all of us are wearing vestments. To use one hand to lift a robe when you're going up the steps, and the other hand, again, is holding consecrated wine. You don't have anything left to hold on to or catch yourself. I want to remind, and it's brown, and that it's so unnatural for that platform to be here. I'll remind you all, when Father Jim Spear was here, he took 2 tumbles down off that altar on Sunday mornings because he just never expected that platform to be there. It's very awkward and unnatural. So if you watch us on Sundays, you'll see that we're always, moving slowly and watching where we're stepping.
Very good point. I hadn't thought about, holding things as you're maneuvering that. I just usually am going in and out. So, any other questions? I guess I'd like to find out what you think of what we've presented to you so far. Are we headed in the right direction? Are there other things that we're not thinking about? And it's not that we haven't thought of other things, but they're not in the first phase of our approach to all this. But if you have any thoughts on that, please speak up now. So
I think it's excellent. Would you please publish the Journey Committee members so if we know them, we can approach them? I don't know who they are.
Sure,
We will do
it's
that.
right on the list, right on
Well,
the
there's-
front. We'll do that by all means, of course.
Chuck Eaton is also on there. Chuck has attended all of our meetings, so right now it just says Marcia, but we know it's part of the Eaton pair.
But it is a very exciting time to be a member of the parish here as we approach the end of the first 200 years and the start of the next. So you're here at the right time. And people that have been here have also been more helpful. As Kathy just mentioned, I want to point out that the Duvas used to live in the town and were very active with us, and see the tentacles of connection of our alumni or members of the parish continue. So give it some thought. The point of this conversation really centers on getting everybody focused on this subject so that your pet ideas can find some way to be vocalized and dealt with.
So I guess, I know people aren't gonna wanna talk, but just for a show of hands, how do people feel about us starting with the electrical, the HVAC, and those safety items on the altar? Does that sound like the right direction? As step one. I mean, other things like down the road, the organ and so forth will need attention, but this is where we gotta start, is rewiring the building and getting that ready, so. And all of these extra things are great to hear about. Anything else for the good of the order this day? It's just from when other churches hear about what this little church does, I mean, my clergy colleagues and Marcia, share just a thought of what do other churches in the Episcopal Church in our region say when you're in meetings, with you and Dan are in meetings?
Well, we have monthly meetings with they're invited, all of the wardens from other churches, especially on the eastern side of Connecticut. And I think Dan would agree that sometimes we kind of sit there and want to hide because these churches are in such bad shape. And they, you almost don't want to blow your horn because you don't want them to feel bad. But we are very, very fortunate, and we have a very generous and we're like a family. And I think that the fact that, we have people that contribute monetarily, but more important, there are other ways that people contribute to the family. So it's amazing how many churches, you talk. I'm originally from Manchester, and I was baptized and confirmed in St. Mary's, as Steve and a few other people were. But St. Mary's in Manchester was a hallmark of the city of Manchester, and it just kills me to see that their buildings are for sale. And I remember when the big church was built after being a small church for a period of time. And it's awful, you know, these poor people are they tried joining the Lutheran church. And I'm sorry, the Lutheran service and the Episcopal service are not a whole lot alike. And so that didn't satisfy things, and people continued to drop out. And it's sad to see what's happening. This church, because of a new way of thinking, as far as community is concerned, we're not just a family of St. Peter's, but we're a family of the town and the surrounding town.
I imagine the folks from Christ Church could echo that same thought. Okay, Joanne.
Here's Joanne.
I just want to add a few things. Besides Marcia and Dan being on those boards with the diocese, people in the community, they are also in awe about everything that we do. I hear comments all the time that, you know, they're so active and they look forward to coming to a lot of our functions. They enjoy it. And we have friends that are Catholic and other denominations, and literally, they go to church Sunday morning or Saturday evening, they go home until the next Sunday or Saturday evening. And so we should be proud of ourselves with everything that we do in the community as well as for ourselves.
By all means, and I'd like to just add to that by saying, the other day Susan and I had a chance to work at the fair, selling tickets for HIHS, and the people there were well aware of the fact that we make contributions on a regular basis to their work, and how other churches have recently simply fallen away. And we're standing there with a reputation of not abandoning their ship, but sticking with them. So it does work, Father Ron. So keep up the good work, sir.
It's all of us. It's all of us. It's not me, believe me. So I think anything else for the good of the order before we call it a day? There's some desserts here, and I see there's still some coffee if anybody would like some. But just the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of His Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And now may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you this day and remain with you forever. And I'm going to take the deacon's thunder again. Let us go forth into the world rejoicing in the power of the Spirit. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
Thanks be to God.